The man who rode up to Rhett Calloway's ranch that scorching August evening wasn't there to collect money. He was there to deliver a debt. When he yanked the Cheyenne woman off his horse and shoved her into the dust, Rhett felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd kept sealed tight since the day he buried his wife. The stranger grinned, tipped his hat, and rode off laughing, leaving behind a woman with fear in her eyes and a former sheriff who'd forgotten what it meant to stand up for anything at all. But that was about to change. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Arizona sun had a way of making everything look dead long before it actually was. It bleached the wood, cracked the earth, and turned green things gray. Rhett Calloway had stopped noticing years ago. He moved through his days like a man underwater, slow, heavy, muffled. The ranch that had once been loud with laughter and the smell of his wife's cooking now stood silent, a monument to all the things he couldn't say and didn't want to feel. His daughter, Ivy, was 12 now. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw. She did the cooking, the mending, the remembering. His son, Cole, was 10, all elbows and quiet anger. The boy hadn't cried at the funeral, hadn't cried since. Rhett told himself that was strength. Deep down, he knew better. They lived like three strangers under one roof. Rhett rose before dawn, worked until his hands bled, and fell into bed without speaking. Ivy kept the house from falling apart. Cole disappeared into the hills with his slingshot and came back only when hunger forced him. They had learned to survive each other, but they had forgotten how to be a family. It was Ivy who saw the rider first. "Someone's coming," she said from the porch, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Rhett looked up from the fence post he was hammering and squinted toward the horizon. A single horse, moving slow, dust rising behind it like a ghost. He set down the hammer and wiped his hands on his jeans, a knot forming in his stomach. Out here, unexpected visitors were rarely good news. The man who rode into the yard was tall and lean, with a face like carved leather and eyes that didn't blink enough. He wore a black duster despite the heat, and his smile was all teeth, no warmth. Rhett recognized the type immediately, a man who made his living off other people's suffering. "Rhett Calloway," the man said, not a question. He swung down from his horse with easy confidence. "Heard you used to be sheriff. Heard you quit after your wife passed." "Shame, that." Rhett's jaw tightened. "State your business or move along." The stranger chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Name's Virgil Cade. I'm what you might call a collector. Your brother-in-law, Thomas Brennan, he owed some folks a considerable sum. Mining debts, gambling debts, the kind that don't go away just because a man drinks himself to death." Rhett felt his chest tighten. Thomas had been his wife's younger brother, a reckless fool who'd spent his whole life running from consequences. Rhett hadn't spoken to him in 2 years, not since the man had shown up drunk at the funeral and tried to borrow money. "Thomas is dead," Rhett said flatly. "Died 3 months back in a Tucson saloon. Whatever he owed, it died with him." Virgil's smile widened. "See, that's where you're wrong, Sheriff. Debts don't die. They transfer. And seeing as you were family, well..." He turned back toward his horse and grabbed someone by the arm. "They sent me to deliver payment." Rhett's breath caught. The woman Virgil dragged into view was Cheyenne. That much was clear from the beadwork on what was left of her dress, and the way her black hair had been roughly shorn short, like someone had tried to strip her of dignity. She was young, maybe 25, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that held more defiance than fear. Her wrists were raw from rope burns. Her feet were bare and bleeding. She didn't look at Rhett. She looked past him, at some point on the horizon, as if willing herself to be anywhere else. "What the hell is this?" Rhett's voice came out strangled. "This," Virgil said, shoving the woman forward so hard she stumbled and fell to her knees in the dust, "is Nita. Or that's what they called her anyway. Your brother-in-law lost her in a card game, then used her as collateral for a loan he never paid back. The men who owned that debt, they don't want her anymore. Too much trouble, they said. So they sent me to settle accounts." He looked Rhett up and down. "Consider her a gift, or a curse. Either way, she's your problem now." Rhett stared at the woman kneeling in his yard, then at Virgil, then back again. Rage was building in his chest, hot and sharp, the first real emotion he'd felt in months. "You think you can just ride up here and dump a human being in my yard like she's livestock?" Virgil shrugged. "I think I just did." "You got a problem with how Thomas handled his affairs. Take it up with the grave. Me. I'm just cleaning up the mess." He swung back onto his horse, tipped his hat mockingly. "She tries to run. She won't get far. And if you're thinking about turning her loose, well, there's men out there who'd pay good money for a woman like that. She'd be back in chains before sundown." He grinned. "But hey, you do what you want, Sheriff. You always did." And then he was gone, riding off into the dusk, leaving nothing behind but hoofprints and a woman who hadn't made a sound. Rhett stood frozen, his mind racing. Ivy had come down from the porch, her face pale. Cole was watching from the barn, eyes wide. The woman, Nita, remained on her knees, breathing hard, her hands pressed flat against the earth as if trying to anchor herself to something solid. "Pa?" Ivy's voice was small, uncertain. Rhett didn't answer. He walked slowly toward Nita, stopping a few feet away. She tensed, but didn't look up. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly she pushed herself to her feet. She was taller than he'd expected, nearly his height, and even in her ruined state, there was something unyielding about her. She met his eyes for the first time, and what he saw there wasn't pleading. It was a challenge, a question. "What kind of man are you?" Rhett didn't have an answer. "There's a shed out back," he said finally, pointing. "It's not much, but it's got a roof and a cot. You can stay there tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Nita said nothing. She turned and walked in the direction he'd pointed, limping slightly, her head held high despite everything. Rhett watched her go, his fists clenched at his sides. "Pa, what's happening?" Ivy whispered. "Go inside," Rhett said. Both of you. Now." Ivy hesitated, then took Cole's hand and pulled him toward the house. Rhett stood alone in the yard as the last light bled out of the sky, feeling like the ground had just shifted beneath him in a way he couldn't name and didn't want to understand. That night, Rhett didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey he didn't open, staring at the shed where a faint sliver of lamplight showed through the cracks. He kept thinking about the way Nita had looked at him, not with hope, not with gratitude, but with a kind of grim endurance that made his chest ache. He'd spent 2 years trying to bury his grief by burying himself in work, in silence, in the comfortable numbness of routine. And now this, a woman he didn't know, carrying a debt he didn't owe, dropped into his life like a stone into still water. He should turn her loose, let her go. It wasn't his problem, but Virgil's words echoed in his head. She'd be back in chains before sundown. Rhett knew men like Virgil. Hell, he'd arrested men like Virgil back when he still wore a badge. They were vultures circling wounded things, waiting for the right moment to strike. If he sent Nita away, she wouldn't find freedom. She'd find worse, and he couldn't live with that. Not after everything. The door creaked open behind him. Ivy stepped out, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes tired. "You should be asleep," Rhett said. "So should you." She sat down beside him, pulling the shawl tighter. "Is she really staying?" "I don't know." "What did Uncle Thomas do to her?" Rhett's jaw worked. "Nothing good." Ivy was quiet for a moment, then softly, "Mama would have helped her." The words hit Rhett like a fist to the gut. He closed his eyes, saw his wife's face. Bright, fierce, full of a kindness that had no limits. She would have brought Nita into the house, fed her, clothed her, fought anyone who tried to take her away. She would have done it without hesitation, without fear. But she was gone, and Rhett wasn't her. "Your mama was a better person than I'll ever be," he said quietly. Ivy leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Pa. Letting her stay." Rhett didn't answer. He wasn't sure there was a right thing anymore. Only choices that hurt less than others. But Nita woke before dawn, the way she always did. The shed was small and smelled of old wood and dust, but it was dry and the cot was softer than the ground. She sat up slowly, testing her body for new pains. Her ribs ached, her feet throbbed. But she was alive, and she was alone, and for now, that was enough. She stood and looked through the gap in the boards. The ranch was quiet, the house dark. Beyond it, The desert stretched out in shades of gray and purple, the sky just beginning to lighten. She could run. The thought was automatic, instinctive. She'd run before, always caught, always dragged back, but always willing to try again. But something made her hesitate. The man, Rhett, he'd been angry, not at her, at the one who'd brought her. She'd seen that kind of anger before, the kind that came from disgust, from principle. It didn't mean he was safe, but it meant he wasn't like the others. And the girl, Ivy. She'd looked at Nita with something close to concern, not revulsion. Nita had learned long ago not to trust kindness. Kindness was a trap. It made you soft, made you hope, and hope was the thing that broke you in the end. But she was so tired of running. She pushed open the shed door and stepped into the cool morning air. The ranch was still. She walked slowly toward the well, her feet leaving dark prints in the dust. The water was cold and clean. She drank deeply, then splashed her face, washing away the grime and sweat of yesterday. When she straightened, she saw him. Rhett was standing on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching her. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Nita stared back, her heart beating hard. This was the moment. He'd either send her away or chain her down. She'd seen both, but he did neither. "There's bread in the kitchen," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "Help yourself." Then he turned and walked back inside. Nita stood by the well, frozen, her mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. An invitation, not an order, not a threat, an invitation. She didn't move for a long time, and when she finally did, it wasn't toward the road. It was toward the house. Ivy was kneading dough when Nita stepped into the kitchen. The girl looked up, startled, then offered a hesitant smile. "Morning?" Nita nodded but said nothing. Her throat felt tight, unused to speech. "There's coffee," Ivy said, gesturing to the pot on the stove. "And Pa wasn't lying about the bread. I made extra." She paused, studying Nita with open curiosity. Do you talk?" Nita's lips twitched, almost a smile. "When I need to." Ivy's face brightened. "Good. I talk enough for both of us, but it's nice to know you can." She cut a thick slice of bread, slathered it with butter, and handed it over. "Sit. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Nita took the bread but didn't sit. She stood near the door, ready to bolt, chewing slowly. The bread was warm and soft, better than anything she'd tasted in months, maybe years. "You don't have to be scared," Ivy said quietly. "Pa's not going to hurt you. He's not that kind of man." Nita swallowed. "What kind of man is he?" Ivy thought about it, her young face serious. "The kind who thinks he's broken. But he's not. He's just sad." Before Nita could respond, the door swung open and Cole walked in, dirty and scowling. He stopped short when he saw her, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Cole, don't be rude, T," Ivy said sharply. "I'm not being rude. I'm asking a question." He crossed his arms. "Pa said some guy dumped her here. Why's she still around?" "Because she's got nowhere else to go," Ivy snapped. "Same as us." Cole's scowl deepened, but he didn't argue. He grabbed a piece of bread and stalked out, letting the door slam behind him. Ivy sighed. "Don't mind him. He's mad at the world." "He's got reason to be," Nita said softly. Ivy looked at her surprised. "You lost people too?" Nita's throat tightened. She nodded once, sharp and quick. "Then you understand," Ivy said simply. She turned back to her dough, punching it down with small, fierce fists. "Pa doesn't talk about Mama. Cole doesn't talk about anything. And me, I just try to keep us all from falling apart." She glanced at Nita. "Maybe you staying here isn't the worst thing. Maybe we all need something different." Nita didn't know what to say to that, so she finished her bread in silence and slipped back outside before the weight of the girl's hope could settle too heavily on her shoulders. Rhett watched from the barn as Nita walked the perimeter of the ranch, her steps careful, deliberate. She was surveying the place, he realized, looking for exits, for weaknesses, for threats. Smart. He'd done the same thing the first time he'd walked into a jail cell as a deputy, knowing that awareness was survival. She stopped near the old herb garden his wife had loved, a patch of earth now choked with weeds and thistle. Margaret had spent hours there, talking to the plants like they were her children, coaxing life out of stubborn soil. After she died, Rhett had let it go. He couldn't bear to tend it, couldn't bear to let it die completely either. So it just existed, a ghost of what it had been. Nita crouched down, her fingers brushing the dried stems. She pulled a weed, then another, her movements slow and methodical. Not destruction, curiosity. Rhett turned away, his chest tight. He had work to do, fences to mend, horses to feed, a life to keep moving, even when it felt like pushing a boulder uphill. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the image of Nita kneeling in the dirt, her hands gentle on something long forgotten. The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm. Nita stayed in the shed. She didn't ask for anything, didn't intrude, didn't speak unless spoken to. But she worked. Rhett would come back from the fields to find the water trough scrubbed clean, the chicken coop mended, the woodpile stacked neat and tight. She moved through the ranch like a shadow, silent, efficient, invisible. Ivy tried to draw her out. She'd bring food to the shed, linger to chat, ask questions Nita mostly deflected. Cole ignored her entirely, which suited Nita fine. And Rhett kept his distance. He told himself it was respect, that he was giving her space, letting her breathe. But the truth was, he didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't hired help. She was something in between, something undefined, and that made him uncomfortable. He was a man who liked clear lines, clear roles. Sheriff, husband, father. He'd lost 2 of those. The third was hanging by a thread. And now there was this, a woman he hadn't asked for, didn't understand, and couldn't seem to ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Rhett walked past the herb garden and stopped. Nita was there again, on her knees, pulling weeds with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. The garden was starting to look different. Still wild, still overgrown, but intentional, like someone cared. "You don't have to do that," Rhett said, surprising himself. Nita looked up, her face unreadable. "I know." "Then why?" She was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the plants. "Because it wants to live," she said finally. "It just needs someone to give it a chance." Rhett felt something crack inside him, sharp and sudden. He turned and walked away before she could see his face. But it was Ivy who finally broke the silence. "She's nice, Pa," she said one night over dinner. Just the 3 of them, like always. Nita never came into the house for meals. She fixed the latch on my window, and she showed me how to braid my hair the way Mama used to. Rhett's fork stilled. "She what?" "She remembered Mama," Ivy said softly. "From before. She said Mama used to give her bread sometimes when Uncle Thomas brought her to town. She said Mama was kind." Rhett's throat closed. He set down his fork, unable to eat. Margaret had always been like that, feeding strays, human and otherwise, offering grace to people the world had given up on. Of course she would have noticed Nita. Of course she would have cared. "She's not staying," Rhett said, his voice rough. "She's just here, until she figures out where to go." Ivy's eyes were too knowing for a 12-year-old. "Where's she gonna go, Pa? You heard what that man said? She's got no place, no people. That's not my problem." "Isn't it?" Rhett stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "Finish your dinner." He walked out into the night, his hands shaking. He didn't know if it was anger or fear or something worse. All he knew was that his carefully constructed numbness was slipping, and he wasn't ready for what lay underneath. But late that night, Rhett heard it. A sound, low and broken, coming from the shed. He stood on the porch, listening, his heart pounding. It took him a moment to recognize it. Crying, not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet, exhausted weeping of someone who'd held it in too long. He should go inside, let her have her grief in private. But his feet carried him forward. He stopped outside the shed door, his hand raised to knock, then hesitated. What would he even say? What comfort could he offer when he had none left for himself? The crying stopped. There was a long silence. Then Nita's voice, hoarse and raw. "I know you're there." Rhett lowered his hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's fine." A pause. "Did you need something?" He should leave, walk away, let her be. "My wife." he said instead, his voice barely above a whisper. She would have taken you in without question. She would have fought anyone who tried to hurt you. She was better than me. Another silence. Then, she's gone? 2 years now. Fever took her, fast and mean. I'm sorry. Rhett leaned his forehead against the door frame. Me too. They stood there, separated by wood and grief, two broken people who didn't know how to be anything else. You don't owe me anything, Nita said finally. I'll leave when you want me to. I don't want you to leave, Rhett said, the words surprising him. I don't know what I want, but I know sending you back out there would make me the kind of man I swore I'd never be. Then I'll stay, Nita said, until you change your mind. Rhett nodded, even though she couldn't see him. All right. He walked back to the house, his chest aching, feeling like he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the grief and the guilt, something small and fragile began to stir. Not hope, not yet, but the possibility of it. Also, the next morning, Rhett woke to find Ivy and Nita working together in the garden. His daughter was laughing, her hands muddy, showing Nita where the lavender used to grow. Nita was listening, nodding, her face softer than he'd ever seen it. Cole was watching from a distance, his arms crossed, but he wasn't scowling, just watching. And Rhett stood on the porch, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, realizing that his dead, silent ranch was starting to feel like something else, something alive. He wasn't ready for it, wasn't sure he ever would be. But maybe, just maybe, that didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was showing up anyway. The garden became Nita's refuge and her confession. Every morning she was there before the sun broke the horizon, her hands working the soil with a reverence that spoke of memory, of loss, of something she couldn't put into words. She didn't ask permission. She simply claimed the space the way a wounded animal claims a den, quietly, carefully, ready to abandon it at the first sign of danger. Rhett watched her from varying distances, never too close, never quite looking away. He told himself he was just making sure she didn't run off, that he was being responsible. But the truth sat heavier in his chest. He watched because something about the way she moved through the world, deliberate, unafraid of hard work, expecting nothing, reminded him of Margaret, not in appearance or manner, but in that bone-deep resilience that refused to be crushed no matter how many times the world tried. By the end of the first week, the garden had begun to show structure. Nita had cleared the worst of the weeds, salvaged what could be saved, and somehow coaxed a few stubborn herbs back from the edge of death. Sage and rosemary, their scent sharp in the dry air. A patch of wild chamomile that Margaret had transplanted from the hills. Lavender that looked more dead than alive, but was showing tiny green shoots at the base. Ivy had taken to joining her in the early mornings, bringing 2 cups of coffee and sitting cross-legged in the dirt while Nita worked. The girl talked enough for both of them, filling the silence with stories about her mother, about school before they'd stopped going, about the ranch before grief had settled over it like dust. Mama used to make tea from the chamomile, Ivy said one morning, running her fingers over the delicate leaves. She said it helped with sleep, with worry. She paused. Pa hasn't slept right since she died. Nita's hands stilled in the dirt. Grief doesn't let you sleep. It waits until you're too tired to fight it, then it sits on your chest until morning. Ivy looked at her, eyes too old for her age. You talk like you know. I do. What did you lose? Nita was quiet for so long that Ivy thought she wouldn't answer, then softly, everything, everyone, more than once. She pulled a stubborn root from the ground, her knuckles white. Loss isn't a single thing. It's a slow taking, piece by piece until you can't remember what being whole felt like. Ivy reached out and touched Nita's hand just briefly. Maybe you can find pieces here. New ones. Nita's throat tightened. She pulled her hand back gently, not unkindly, and returned to her work. Hope was dangerous. She'd learned that lesson too many times to forget it now. But when Ivy didn't leave, didn't push, just sat there in comfortable silence, sipping her coffee, Nita felt something shift. Not hope. Not yet. But the absence of fear. And that was something. From the barn, Rhett saw his daughter reach for Nita's hand and saw Nita pull away. He saw the hurt flash across Ivy's face, then the understanding. And he saw Nita keep working, her shoulders tight with some internal battle she wouldn't share. He recognized that posture. He wore it himself most days. Cole was harder to predict. The boy circled Nita like a wary dog, neither approaching nor fleeing, just watching. He'd taken to following her at a distance when she walked the fence line in the evenings, staying 50 yards back, pretending he was doing something else. Nita never acknowledged him, but Rhett noticed she walked slower on those evenings, paused longer at certain spots, gave the boy time to observe without feeling observed. It was a strange, silent negotiation. Neither willing to reach out first, but neither willing to completely turn away. One afternoon, Rhett found Cole sitting on the fence near the herb garden, watching Nita work. The boy's face was set in its usual scowl, but his eyes were tracking her movements with something close to curiosity. "She know what she's doing?" Rhett asked, leaning against the fence beside his son. Cole shrugged. "Seems like it. You could ask her." "Why would I do that?" "Because you're clearly interested." Cole's jaw set. "I'm not interested. I'm just watching." Rhett bit back a smile. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a while. Then Cole said, "She talks to the plants." "Your mama did too." "That's different." "How?" Cole struggled with the words. "Mama talked to them because she loved them. She talks to them like she's asking permission, like she doesn't belong here." Rhett felt something tighten in his chest. The boy saw more than anyone gave him credit for. "Maybe she doesn't think she does." "Do you want her here?" It was the most direct question Cole had asked him in months. Rhett chose his words carefully. "I don't want her hurt, and sending her away would hurt her." "That's not what I asked." Rhett looked at his son, saw Margaret's fierce honesty looking back at him. "I don't know yet, but I'm trying to figure it out." Cole nodded slowly. "Mama would have kept her." "I know. Does that matter?" Rhett's throat went tight. "Yeah, it does." Cole jumped down from the fence and walked away, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. But he didn't head toward the hills like he usually did. He headed toward the barn, toward work, toward home. And that felt like something too. The first real conversation between Rhett and Nita happened by accident. He'd stayed late mending a section of fence that had come down in a dust storm, and when he finally headed back, the sun had set and the stars were out. He found Nita sitting on the porch steps, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the sky. He almost turned around, almost gave her the privacy she so clearly preferred, but something made him stop. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She glanced at him, then back at the stars. "Don't want to." "Nightmares?" "Memories." "Same thing." Rhett lowered himself onto the step, keeping a respectful distance between them. His body ached from the day's work, but it was a good ache, the kind that meant he'd accomplished something. "I get that. Some nights I'd rather stay awake than see what's waiting behind my eyes." Nita pulled the blanket tighter. "Your wife." "Among other things." He rubbed his face. "The day she died, I was supposed to be home. I'd promised her, but there was trouble in town and I went to deal with it. By the time I got back—" He stopped, the words catching. "She was calling for me. Ivy said she kept asking where I was, and I wasn't there. You couldn't have known." "Doesn't make it easier." Nita was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother died while I was being dragged away. They took me from our village when I was 15, sold me to a white trader who wanted someone to cook and clean. I could hear her screaming my name. I heard it for miles." Her voice was flat, empty of emotion, which somehow made it worse. "I spent 5 years trying to get back to her. By the time I did, the village was gone. Everyone scattered or dead. I never found her grave." Rhett felt something crack open in his chest. "I'm sorry." "Me too." She turned to look at him then, her eyes reflecting starlight. "But being sorry doesn't change it, doesn't bring them back, doesn't make the loss smaller." "No," Rhett agreed. "It doesn't." So what do you do? How do you keep going when everything that mattered is gone?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for 2 years, the question he still didn't have an answer to. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Most days I just put one foot in front of the other and hope that's enough." "Is it?" "Sometimes, not always." Nita nodded slowly. "That's more honest than most people would be." "What about you? How do you keep going?" She considered the question. "I survive. That's all I know how to do anymore. Survive and try not to feel too much. Feeling gets you killed or worse. That's not living. That's just existing. Maybe that's all some of us get. Rhett wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she deserved more, that everyone did, but he'd be a hypocrite. He'd been doing the same thing for 2 years, existing, going through the motions, keeping his heart locked down so tight nothing could touch it. My wife would have hated what I've become, he said quietly. She'd have kicked my ass for giving up on everything that mattered. Then why do it? Because it hurts less than the alternative. Caring means losing, and I can't. He stopped, his voice breaking. I can't survive losing again. Nita turned back to the stars. Then we're both cowards. Maybe. They sat in silence after that, two damaged people who understood each other in ways neither wanted nor asked for. And when Nita finally stood to return to the shed, Rhett didn't try to stop her, but he watched her go, and for the first time since Margaret died, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely alone in his grief. The changes came slowly after that. Nita started eating breakfast in the kitchen, not just taking bread and leaving. She didn't say much, but her presence became a fixture, something expected rather than endured. Ivy bloomed under the attention, chattering constantly, dragging Nita into conversations about everything and nothing. Cole remained wary, but one morning Rhett found the boy crouched beside Nita in the garden, listening intently as she explained the difference between medicinal and culinary herbs. Nita's voice was patient, clear, without condescension, and Cole was actually listening, asking questions, engaging in a way he hadn't in months. Rhett stood in the barn doorway watching them, his chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to gratitude. That afternoon, Nita approached him while he was shoeing a horse. She stood at a careful distance, waiting until he looked up. I need supplies, she said. Seeds, tools. There are plants that could grow here, things that would help. Help with what? Medicine, food, trade. She crossed her arms, defensive. I can make the garden useful, pay back what I owe for staying here. You don't owe me anything. Her jaw tightened. I'm not charity. Rhett set down the horse's hoof and straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. I never said you were. Then let me earn my place. There was pride in her voice, fierce and unyielding. Pride and fear that he'd say no, that he'd reduce her to nothing more than a burden. Rhett understood that fear. He'd felt it himself when he'd quit being sheriff, when he'd stopped being a husband, when he'd failed at being a father. Make me a list, he said. I'll get what you need. Relief flashed across her face, quickly hidden. Thank you. Don't thank me, just make the garden worth thanking. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she turned and walked away, her spine straight, her shoulders squared. Ivy appeared at his elbow. You made her happy. I gave her seeds, not a kingdom. You gave her purpose. That's better. Ivy looked up at him with Margaret's knowing eyes. You should try it sometime. Smart mouth, Rhett muttered, but there was no heat in it. Ivy grinned and skipped away, leaving Rhett standing in the barn, wondering when his 12-year-old daughter had become wiser than he was. The trip to town took most of the day. Rhett brought Cole along, partly for the company, mostly because the boy needed to get off the ranch, and remember there was a world beyond their fence line. They loaded the wagon with supplies, seed packets, hand tools, a new hoe, fertilizer, and Rhett added a few things Nita hadn't asked for. A pair of work gloves that would actually fit her hands, a wide-brimmed hat to keep the sun off her face, a jar of salve for the rope burns on her wrists that hadn't fully healed. Cole noticed but didn't comment until they were halfway home. You like her. Rhett nearly dropped the reins. What? Nita. You like her. I barely know her. But you like her. You bought her stuff she didn't ask for. I bought practical things. She's working hard. She needs proper tools. Cole was quiet for a moment, then, It's okay if you like her, Pa. Mama wouldn't be mad. Rhett's throat closed. How do you know what your mama would think? Because she loved you, and she wouldn't want you to be alone forever. Cole stared straight ahead, his young face serious. Ivy thinks Nita's good for us. I think maybe she's right. She's not replacing your mother. I know that. I'm not stupid. Cole's voice was sharp, defensive, then softer. But maybe she doesn't have to replace anyone. Maybe she can just be something new. Rhett didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and they rode the rest of the way in silence. But his son's words echoed in his head, impossible to unhear. When they got back, Nita was waiting on the porch. She stood when she saw the wagon, her eyes scanning the supplies with an intensity that made Rhett's chest ache. This mattered to her, really mattered. "It's everything on the list," he said, climbing down. "And a few extras." She stepped forward, running her fingers over the tools with something close to reverence. Then she saw the gloves, the hat, the salve. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "Why did you?" "Because you deserve to be cared for. Because no one else ever has. Because I'm trying to remember what it feels like to do something good." He didn't say any of that. Instead, "Because you're going to tear your hands apart otherwise, and that's just inefficient." Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Practical." "That's me." She picked up the gloves, testing the fit. They were perfect. Of course they were. He'd paid attention without meaning to. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Make something worth thanking me for." This time she did smile, small and fleeting, but real. And Rhett felt something shift in his chest, something he wasn't ready to name. That night, after the children were asleep, Rhett found Nita in the garden again. She was planting by moonlight, her hands gentle on the seeds, whispering something in her own language that sounded like prayer but probably wasn't. He didn't interrupt, just watched from the shadows as she worked, this woman who'd been treated like property, like garbage, like nothing, and who was somehow still capable of tenderness, still capable of hope. And he realized that Cole was right. Nita wasn't replacing Margaret. No one ever could. But she was teaching him something Margaret would have wanted him to learn, that life could grow even in the hardest soil. That beauty could come from broken places. That survival wasn't the same as living, but it was a start. The following weeks brought change like rain after drought, slow at first, then everywhere at once. The garden exploded with life. Nita worked from dawn until dusk, her hands never still, and the results were undeniable. Rows of herbs grew tall and fragrant. Vegetables pushed up through the soil. Even the lavender, which everyone had written off as dead, came back with a vengeance. Ivy spent every spare moment with her, learning plant names, uses, stories. Nita taught her how to make poultices for cuts, teas for fever, salves for burns. She taught her which plants were poison and which were medicine, and how sometimes the difference was just a matter of dose. Cole was slower to come around, but eventually he did. He started bringing Nita things he found. Interesting rocks, unusual plants, a bird's nest that had fallen from a tree. She accepted each offering with quiet thanks, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boy began to talk to her. Not about anything important, just small things. The weather, the horses, a fox he'd seen in the hills. But it was progress. And Rhett watched it all with a mixture of relief and fear, because his carefully constructed walls were crumbling and he wasn't sure he could survive what came after. One evening, disaster struck in the form of a letter. Rhett found it tacked to the barn door, unsigned, written in a hand he didn't recognize. The message was simple and vicious. "That Cheyenne woman you're keeping doesn't belong here. Send her back where she came from, or we'll do it for you." His blood went cold. He tore down the letter and stormed into the house, his mind racing. Ivy was setting the table. Cole was washing up. Nita was slicing bread, her movements calm and sure. "Where is it?" Rhett demanded. All three looked up, startled. "Where's what?" Ivy asked. "Did anyone come to the house today? Leave anything?" Nita set down the knife carefully. "What happened?" He showed her the letter. Her face went very still, very blank. The mask she wore when she was preparing for pain. "I'll leave," she said quietly. "Tonight. Like hell you will." Rhett crumpled the letter in his fist. "Some coward with a pencil doesn't get to decide who stays on my land. It's not worth the trouble." "Yes, it is." His voice came out harder than he intended. "You're not property. You're not trash to be thrown away when someone decides you're inconvenient. You're a person, and you're staying." Nita's eyes widened. "You don't understand what people like this will do. I was a sheriff for 15 years. I know exactly what they'll do, and I know how to handle it." Pa's right, Ivy said fiercely. You're not going anywhere. Even Cole nodded, his young face set in stubborn lines. Nita looked at all of them, her throat working, her eyes suspiciously bright. You barely know me. We know enough, Rhett said, and he realized it was true. He knew she worked harder than anyone he'd ever met. He knew she was kind to his children. He knew she'd been hurt and kept going anyway. He knew she made his dead house feel alive again. He knew that losing her would matter, and that terrified him, but not as much as the thought of standing by while someone threatened her. We'll keep watch, he said. Double-check the locks, stay alert, but you're not leaving, not unless you want to. Nita stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. All right, I'll stay. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Rhett saw something in her eyes that looked like trust. That night, he sat on the porch with his old service revolver on his lap, watching the darkness, listening for trouble. He hadn't held the gun in 2 years, hadn't wanted to. But now his hands remembered the weight, the balance, the cold promise of protection. The door creaked open. Nita stepped out, wrapped in a blanket. You should sleep, she said. So should you. She sat down beside him, closer than she'd ever been. You really meant it. What you said. Every word. Why? I'm nothing to you. Rhett turned to look at her, this woman who'd survived horrors he couldn't imagine and still found the strength to be gentle with his children, to bring life back to his wife's garden, to keep going when most people would have given up. You're not nothing, he said roughly. You're... He didn't finish. Couldn't. Because the truth was too big and too frightening, and he wasn't ready to face it. But Nita seemed to understand anyway. She leaned her head against his shoulder just for a moment and whispered, Thank you. And Rhett closed his eyes and let himself feel something besides grief for the first time in 2 years. Let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, broken things could still find a way to heal. The threat didn't come that night, or the next. Days passed with nothing but the usual rhythm of ranch work and the growing tension that sat like humidity before a storm. Rhett kept the revolver close, his senses sharp, watching for riders on the horizon or shadows that didn't belong. But nothing came. Just silence. And silence was worse because it meant whoever had written that letter was waiting, planning, choosing their moment. Nita felt it too. She moved differently now, her eyes constantly scanning, her body coiled tight like she was ready to run at any second. The easy progress she'd made with the children stalled. She grew quieter, more distant, retreating back into the careful shell she'd worn when she first arrived. Ivy noticed immediately. You're scared, she said one morning in the garden, her voice matter-of-fact. Nita's hand stilled in the soil. I'm careful. There's a difference. Is there? Ivy pulled a weed with more force than necessary. Because it looks the same from here. Your father is taking a risk keeping me. I won't let that risk become a tragedy. So you're just going to leave? Run away before anything bad happens? That's how you survive. Ivy's face flushed with sudden anger. That's not surviving. That's just waiting to die somewhere else. She stood abruptly, dirt falling from her skirt. My mama didn't survive. She died even though she did everything right, everything safe. And my pa's been waiting to die ever since, just going through the motions like you are. But you know what? We're still here, still breathing, still trying, and maybe that's the point. She walked away before Nita could respond, leaving her kneeling in the dirt with tears burning behind her eyes, and the truth sitting heavy in her chest. The girl was right. Survival wasn't living, it was just a slower kind of dying. But living meant risking pain, meant opening yourself up to loss. And Nita had already lost everything once. She wasn't sure she had the strength to do it again. From the barn, Rhett had heard the exchange. He'd seen Ivy storm off and Nita collapse into herself, shoulders shaking with silent sobs she thought no one could see. Every instinct told him to go to her, to offer comfort, to tell her she didn't have to be strong all the time. But he was the last person who should be giving that advice. He'd been hiding from his own pain for 2 years, building walls so thick nothing could get through. Cole appeared beside him, following his gaze. She's crying. I know. You gonna do something about it? Like what? I don't know. You're the adult. Cole kicked at the dirt. Mama always said when someone's hurting, you sit with them. You don't have to fix it. Just don't let them hurt alone. Rhett looked down at his son, this boy who was trying so hard to be tough, to be a man before his time. When'd you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just haven't been paying attention. The words stung because they were true. Rhett had been so lost in his own grief he'd failed to see his children growing up, struggling, needing him. He'd failed Margaret in her final moments, and he'd been failing her children ever since. You're right, he said quietly. I haven't been. I'm sorry. Cole shrugged, uncomfortable with the apology. Just do better. I'm trying. Try harder. The boy walked away, his small frame carrying weight no child should have to bear. Rhett stood there for a long moment, then made a decision. He crossed the yard to where Nita still knelt in the garden, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with the effort of holding herself together. Ivy's got her mother's temper, he said, lowering himself to sit on the ground beside her, and her mother's way of cutting straight through bullshit to get to the truth. Nita wiped her face quickly, but didn't look at him. She's a good girl. She is, and she's right, you know, about the running, about the surviving versus living. You don't understand. I understand better than you think. Rhett picked up a handful of soil, let it run through his fingers. I've been running too, just in place. Same thing, different method. But it doesn't work, does it? The fear catches up eventually. Nita finally turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed and fierce. I've been bought and sold 3 times. Beaten, starved, treated like an animal. I escaped twice and got dragged back both times. The 3rd time they just gave up and dumped me here like I was garbage. So forgive me if I don't see the point in putting down roots when I know they'll just rip me up again. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. You're right, I can't. Rhett met her gaze steadily. But I can promise that if anyone tries, they'll have to go through me first, and I'm meaner than I look when I'm protecting what's mine. Nita's breath caught. I'm not yours. That came out wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. I mean, you're part of this place now, part of what we're building here. You matter. To Ivy, to Cole, to... He stopped, the next word sticking in his throat. To you? Nita's voice was barely a whisper. Rhett looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the fear in the walls to the woman underneath. Strong, brave, broken in all the same places he was, and he realized with sudden clarity that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without wanting to, he'd started to care. Yeah, he said roughly, to me. The silence that followed was fragile, charged with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Nita reached out and took his hand, her fingers rough from garden work, her grip strong. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The gesture said enough. They sat there together as the sun climbed higher, 2 damaged souls learning what it meant to not be alone. The peace lasted 3 more days. Then Virgil Cade came back. He rode in just after noon with 2 other men, both rough-looking and armed. Rhett was in the south pasture when he heard the horses. He dropped his tools and ran, his heart pounding, his hand already reaching for the revolver he'd taken to wearing at his hip. He made it back to find the 3 men dismounted in his yard, Virgil grinning that same oily grin while his companions looked around with the casual assessment of predators sizing up prey. Nita was on the porch, frozen, her face gone white. Ivy stood beside her, chin raised defiantly. Cole was nowhere to be seen, which worried Rhett almost as much as the visitors. "Calloway," Virgil called out cheerfully. "Told you I'd be back." Rhett stopped 10 feet away, his hand resting on his gun. "State your business and get off my land." "Now that's not very hospitable," Virgil gestured to his companions. "This here's Jake and Sutton. They work for some associates of mine who've taken an interest in your house guest. She's not for sale." "See, that's where you're wrong." Virgil's smile widened. "She was never yours to keep. She's payment on a debt, and my employers have decided they want their property back. They've got a buyer lined up. Rich man up in Santa Fe who's looking for exotic help, if you know what I mean. She's not going anywhere." "You planning to stop us?" Jake asked, his hand moving to his own gun. He was young, maybe 25, with dead eyes that said he'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Rhett's mind raced. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he'd spent 15 years enforcing the law, dealing with men exactly like these. He knew their type. Bullies who relied on intimidation, who'd fold if someone pushed back hard enough. Maybe. I'm planning to enforce the law, Rhett said calmly. Slavery's illegal in this territory, has been for years. You try to take her by force, that's kidnapping. I'll have the marshal here before sundown. Virgil laughed. The marshal? He's 3 days' ride away, and he doesn't give a damn about some Indian woman. You know that as well as I do. Try me and find out. The tension stretched tight as wire. Virgil's smile faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. He hadn't expected resistance. Most people didn't fight back. Then Nita spoke. I'll go. No, Rhett said sharply. I'll go, she repeated, stepping forward. I won't have blood spilled over me. Not yours, not the children's. I'll go quietly. The hell you will. Rhett moved to stand between her and the men. Get back in the house. Take the kids to the cellar and lock the door. Rhett, now. Ivy grabbed Nita's arm, pulling her back. Come on, please. Nita resisted for a moment, her eyes locked on Rhett's back, then let herself be led inside. The door closed with a heavy thud. Virgil's smile returned, colder now. That was touching, real noble, but it doesn't change the facts. We're taking her. You can let us do it peaceful, or we can make it hard. Your choice. Here's my choice, Rhett said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. You get back on your horses and ride out. You don't come back. You don't send anyone else. You leave her alone. And maybe I don't hunt you down and put a bullet in each of you for trespassing and making threats. Jake laughed. You in what army, old man? Just me. Rhett's hand moved in a blur, drawing his revolver and cocking it in one smooth motion. The barrel was pointed dead center at Virgil's chest before any of them could react. And I don't need an army, just one bullet per bastard. The yard went silent. Virgil's smile disappeared. Jake and Sutton both tensed, hands hovering over their guns, calculating odds. You're making a mistake, Virgil said carefully. I've made plenty. This isn't one of them. You can't watch her forever. Sooner or later you'll slip up, and we'll be waiting. Then I'll kill you when you come. Simple as that. Virgil stared at him, trying to decide if he was bluffing. Rhett's hand was steady as stone, his finger resting on the trigger, his eyes cold with absolute conviction. This wasn't a man who would back down. Finally, Virgil raised his hand slowly. All right, we'll go. But this isn't over. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. The three men mounted their horses, moving deliberately slow, watching Rhett for any sign of weakness. They found none. As they turned to leave, Virgil looked back. You're a fool, Calloway. That woman isn't worth dying for. That's where you're wrong, Rhett said. She's worth living for. And that's a hell of a lot harder. They rode off, kicking up dust, their laughter fading into the distance. Rhett stood motionless until they were out of sight, then his legs nearly buckled. He lowered the gun with shaking hands, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The door burst open. Nita ran out, Ivy and Cole behind her. She stopped in front of Rhett, her face a storm of emotions. You could have been killed, she said, her voice breaking. So could you. I'm not worth that risk. Stop. Rhett holstered his gun and grabbed her shoulders, not roughly but firmly enough that she had to look at him. Stop deciding what you're worth. You don't get to make that call anymore. I do, and I say you're worth fighting for. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Why? Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Because you're not someone like you. You're Nita. You're the woman who brought life back to my wife's garden, who taught my daughter about healing, who made my son smile for the first time in 2 years. You're the person who reminds me every damn day that broken things can still be beautiful. His voice cracked. And because somewhere along the way, I started caring whether you lived or died. And I can't just turn that off. Nita stared at him, her breath coming in short gasps. Then she did something neither of them expected. She kissed him. It was brief, desperate, more collision than romance, but it said everything neither of them had words for. When she pulled back, they were both shaking. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. What do we do? We fight, together, and we don't let the bastards win. Ivy cleared her throat loudly. That was really intense and also kind of gross because you're old people, but I'm glad you're both okay. Despite everything, Rhett laughed. Cole cracked a smile. And Nita, for the first time since she'd arrived, looked at the three of them and let herself believe that maybe this could be home. But the relief was short-lived. That night, as they sat around the dinner table trying to pretend everything was normal, reality crashed back down. Virgil and his men wouldn't give up that easily. They'd be back, probably with more men, more guns, less patience. "We need a plan," Rhett said, pushing his food around his plate. "I could leave," Nita said. "Head north, lose myself in the territories." "No," Rhett's voice was firm. "We're past that option." "Then what?" "We make it legal, make it impossible for them to touch you." "How?" Rhett was quiet for a moment, an idea forming that was either brilliant or insane. "We get married." The silence was deafening. Ivy's fork clattered to her plate. Cole's eyes went wide. Nita's face drained of color. "What?" she breathed. "If you're my wife, legally bound, they can't claim you as property or payment on someone else's debt. You'd have rights, protection under the law. It's not perfect, but it's something." "That's..." Nita struggled for words. "That's a terrible reason to get married." "Is it?" "We both know what this is. A practical arrangement. Protection for you, help around the ranch for me. We don't have to... It doesn't have to be more than that. Just a legal contract." "You'd tie yourself to me like that? Forever?" Rhett looked at her across the table, this woman who'd somehow slipped past all his defenses and made him feel again. "I can think of worse fates." "Pa," Ivy said quietly. "What about Mama?" The question hit like a punch. Rhett closed his eyes, fighting the wave of guilt. "Your Mama's gone, sweetheart, and she'd want us to survive. All of us, including Nita. Would she want you to marry someone you don't love?" "I didn't say I don't love her." The words came out before Rhett could stop them. His eyes flew to Nita, saw her shock mirrored in her face. "I mean, I don't know what I feel, but I know I don't want to lose her. And if this is what it takes to keep her safe, then yes, I'll do it." Nita's hands were shaking. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not asking for anything except a chance to keep you alive. The rest, we'll figure out the rest as we go." Nita looked at their joined hands, then at Ivy and Cole, who were watching with wide eyes and barely contained hope. Then back at Rhett, this broken man who was somehow still capable of extraordinary courage. "All right," she whispered. "I'll marry you." Ivy burst into tears, happy and sad all mixed together. Cole looked stunned but not unhappy, and Rhett felt the ground shift beneath him again, knowing he'd just committed to something that would change everything, for better or worse. They rode to town 3 days later, just the four of them in the wagon. Rhett had sent word ahead to the justice of the peace, a practical man named Henderson who asked no questions and cared only that the forms were filled out correctly. The ceremony took 10 minutes, witnessed by Henderson's wife and a bored clerk who kept checking his pocket watch. "Do you, Rhett Calloway, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Nita?" Henderson paused, looking at the form. "You got a last name?" "No," Nita said quietly. "Then it'll be Calloway after today. Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Nita looked at Rhett, standing beside her in his best shirt, his jaw tight with emotion he was fighting to contain. She thought about all the ways her life had been stolen from her, all the choices that had been made on her behalf by people who saw her as less than human. And here was a man offering her something no one ever had. A choice, a chance, a future that was hers to shape. "I do," she said, and meant it. Henderson pronounced them married, had them sign the papers, and sent them on their way with all the ceremony of filing a land deed. But as they walked out of that dusty office into the afternoon sun, Rhett and Nita were legally bound, and no one could claim her as property ever again. On the ride home, Ivy chattered excitedly about what this meant, making plans for the ranch, for the garden, for their new life. Cole was quieter but kept stealing glances at Nita with something like acceptance. And Rhett and Nita sat side by side on the wagon bench, not touching, not speaking, both processing what they'd just done. "I'll sleep in the barn," Rhett said finally. "You can have the bedroom. I want this to be comfortable for you. The shed is fine. You're my wife now. You get the bedroom. I'm your wife on paper. Nothing's really changed. Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her. Everything's changed. You have my name, my protection, a legal claim to this land and everything on it. That matters. You matter. He took a breath. And yes, maybe this started as just a practical arrangement, but I meant what I said at dinner. I don't know exactly what I feel, but I know it's more than obligation. So maybe we can just see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations, just honest. Nita's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to do this, how to trust this. Every good thing I've ever had was taken away. Then we'll learn together because I'm pretty bad at this too. A smile ghosted across her face. We're quite a pair. Yeah, we are. They started moving again, the wagon creaking over rutted road, the children's voices rising and falling in the back. And Nita leaned her head on Rhett's shoulder just for a moment, letting herself imagine that maybe, just maybe, this broken thing they were building might actually hold. When they got home, there was smoke on the horizon, dark, thick, coming from the direction of the ranch. Rhett's blood went cold. He whipped the horses faster, the wagon bouncing dangerously, Ivy and Cole holding on tight. They crested the final hill and saw it. The barn was burning, flames licking high into the sky, smoke billowing black and angry. And in the yard, waiting, were Virgil Cade and 6 more men, all armed, all grinning. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Calloway," Virgil called out. "We brought a wedding present." Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop, his mind racing. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and his children were in the line of fire. He'd made a terrible miscalculation. He'd thought the marriage would solve everything. Instead, he just backed them all into a corner with no way out. Nita stood up in the wagon, her voice ringing clear. "You want me? Fine, I'll go. Just let them leave." "No," Rhett said. "It's the only way." "No." He stood beside her, drawing his revolver. "We made a choice. We stand by it. Together." Virgil's grin widened. "How touching. Looks like we're doing this the hard way after all." And as the sun began to set, painting the burning barn in shades of gold and crimson, Rhett Calloway prepared to fight for the family he'd built from the ashes of the old one, knowing that win or lose, everything was about to change forever. Time seemed to slow as Rhett's mind calculated impossible odds. 7 armed men against 1, with 2 children and a woman who'd already suffered more than anyone should have to bear. The barn crackled and popped behind them, sending embers spiraling into the darkening sky like angry fireflies. His horses stamped nervously, sensing the violence that hung in the air like electricity before a lightning strike. Then Cole moved. The boy had been silent in the back of the wagon, but now he stood up, his face set with determination that looked far too old for his 10 years. "Get down, Pa. I know where the rifles are." "Cole, no. I can shoot. You taught me." The boy's voice didn't waver. "Mama made you teach me, remember? In case something happened to you." Rhett's heart clenched. Margaret had insisted over his protests that both children learn to handle weapons. She'd grown up on the frontier, had seen what happened to families who couldn't defend themselves. He'd thought she was being paranoid. Now he realized she'd been preparing them for exactly this. "Listen to the boy," Virgil said, his voice thick with mockery. "Seems he's got more sense than his pa. Though it won't matter much. 7 guns against 2? Those are losing odds, Calloway." "Maybe," Rhett said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "But I was a lawman for 15 years. Spent most of that time dealing with cowards who only felt brave in groups. I'm betting half your men will run the second real bullets start flying. That's an expensive bet. I've got nothing left to lose." Rhett helped Ivy and Cole down from the wagon, positioning them behind it. To Nita, he said quietly, "Stay low. No matter what happens, you stay down. I'm not hiding while you die for me. You're not hiding, you're surviving. That's what you do, remember?" He touched her face briefly, a gesture that held all the things he didn't have time to say. "Stay alive. That's all I'm asking." Before she could respond, Cole returned with 2 rifles, moving fast and low. He handed one to his father and kept the other, his small hands gripping it with confidence that broke Rhett's heart, and made him proud in equal measure. Virgil's smile faded when he saw the rifles. "You're really going to let your boy fight?" "I'm not letting him do anything. He's making his own choice, same as his sister." Rhett glanced at Ivy, who had picked up a thick piece of firewood and was holding it like a club, her face pale but determined. "Same as all of us." "Then you're all fools." Virgil raised his hand and his men spread out, forming a loose semicircle around the wagon. "Last chance. Send the woman out and we leave. Everyone lives." "She's my wife," Rhett said, and the words carried a weight that surprised him. "Legal and binding. You touch her, you're committing a crime against a married woman, against me, against the law. And I will hunt every last one of you down." "The law doesn't care about some Indian whore with a piece of paper," Rhett fired. The bullet kicked up dust 6 inches from Virgil's boot. The crack of the rifle echoed across the yard, and suddenly everyone was moving. Virgil's men dove for cover, drawing weapons, shouting. Rhett worked the bolt action, aimed at Jake, who was bringing up his pistol. "Drop it, or the next one goes through your skull," Rhett commanded. Jake hesitated, looking to Virgil for guidance. The moment stretched. Then a shot rang out from the house. Everyone froze. Rhett's eyes snapped to the building, and his breath caught. In the window of the second floor, barely visible in the growing darkness, was a rifle barrel, and behind it, he knew somehow, was his wife. Nita had circled around while they were talking, gotten inside, found Margaret's old Winchester. She'd said she wouldn't hide. He should have known she meant it. "That makes 3 guns, Rhett called out. 3 people who aren't afraid to use them. Still like your odds?" Virgil's face had gone red with rage. "You're dead, Calloway. All of you. Might take a few of us down, but we'll finish you. Maybe. Or maybe you'll be the first one I shoot, and your boys will realize they're risking their lives for your pride and a paycheck." Rhett's voice carried across the yard, addressing the other men directly. "How much is he paying you? $50? $100? Is that worth dying over? Because I promise you I won't miss at this range, and I won't hesitate." One of the men, younger than the rest, shifted uncomfortably. "Virgil, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Tommy." "But he's right. This ain't worth—" "I said shut up." Virgil spun on the young man. "You want to run? You run. But you don't get paid, and you don't come back." Tommy looked between Virgil and Rhett, weighing his options. Then he lowered his gun. "I'm out. This is crazy." He backed toward his horse slowly, hands raised. "I didn't sign up to kill kids. Coward? Maybe. But I'll be a living coward." Tommy mounted his horse and rode off into the twilight, not looking back. That left 6. Still impossible odds, but better. Rhett could feel the dynamic shifting. One man breaking ranks had planted doubt in the others. They were wondering if their loyalty was worth the cost. "Anyone else want to walk away?" Rhett asked. "Last chance before this gets bloody." 2 more men exchanged glances. One of them, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, spat into the dirt. "Hell with this. I got a family. I ain't dying for your vendetta, Virgil." He nodded to his companion. "Come on, Dutch." Dutch hesitated only a moment before following. They mounted up and left, leaving Virgil with just 3 men, Jake, Sutton, and a heavy-set man Rhett didn't recognize. Virgil was shaking with fury. "Fine, 4's enough. We burn them out. Shoot them when they run." "The barn's already burning," Jake pointed out, "and the house is stone. Won't catch easy." "Then we wait. They can't stay in there forever. They gotta come out eventually, and when they do—" Another shot cracked from the house, this one close enough to Virgil's head that he felt the wind of its passage. He dove behind a water trough, his hat flying off. Nita's voice carried from the window, clear and cold. "The next one won't miss. Leave now or I'll kill you myself." Rhett felt something fierce and hot bloom in his chest. Pride, fear, love. All tangled together in a way he couldn't separate and didn't want to. This woman who'd been treated as property, who'd had every choice stolen from her, was standing in his house with a rifle, defending his family like it was her own. Because it was. That's what the marriage certificate meant. What the vows had meant, spoken in that dusty office with no romance or ceremony. They'd bound themselves together, and now they were fighting for that bond. "Nita," Rhett called out. "Watch the one on the left. He's got a rifle, too." "I see him." Jake was repositioning, trying to get an angle on the window. Cole saw it, too. The boy raised his rifle, his hands shaking but his aim steady. Stop moving or I'll shoot. Jake laughed. Kid, you don't have the... Cole fired. The bullet hit the ground between Jake's feet, and the man's laugh died. Cole worked the bolt action, chambered another round. Next one goes higher. Jesus, Jake breathed. The kid's serious. We're all serious, Rhett said. This is our home, our family. You think we won't defend it? The heavy-set man Rhett didn't know suddenly stood up, hands raised. I'm done. This is insane. Virgil, you want to die over this, that's your business, but I got no stake in it. He walked to his horse, mounted, and rode off without another word. That left 3. Virgil, Jake, and Sutton. 3 men against a family that had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Sutton looked at Virgil, then at the house where Nita's rifle barrel gleamed in the firelight from the burning barn. He'd been quiet this whole time, just following orders, but now Rhett could see the calculation in his eyes. The risk versus reward. The certainty of violence versus the possibility of survival. I didn't sign up for this, Sutton said finally. You said it'd be easy. In and out, grab the woman, collect our pay. You didn't say nothing about fighting a whole family. Because I didn't think they'd be stupid enough to fight, Virgil's voice was rising, losing control. It's one woman. She's not worth this. Then let her go, Rhett said. Walk away. Live to fight another day. I can't. Virgil's face was twisted with something beyond greed now, pride, ego, the inability to accept defeat. I made promises. Took money. If I go back empty-handed, I'm dead anyway. That's not our problem. It is now. Virgil raised his pistol, aimed it at the wagon where Ivy was crouched. You want your daughter to live, you send Nita out. Right now. Rhett's world narrowed to that gun barrel pointed at his child. Every instinct screamed at him to comply, to trade anything to keep Ivy safe. But he knew it wouldn't work. Virgil was desperate, cornered. He'd take Nita and kill them all anyway just to tie up loose ends. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats, then Ivy stood up. No, baby, get down. I'm not scared of you, Ivy said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You're just a bully. And my pa taught me that bullies only win if you let them. Ivy, Nita's my family now, Ivy continued, walking forward slowly. Rhett's heart was hammering so hard he thought it would burst. You want her? You have to go through me, through all of us. And maybe you'll win. Maybe you'll kill us. But you'll have to live with that. You'll have to know you murdered a little girl because you couldn't stand losing. Virgil's hand was shaking. The gun wavered. Jake and Sutton were staring at the girl with horror and something like shame. Christ, Virgil, Sutton said. Put the gun down. She's a kid. Shut up. No. Sutton holstered his own weapon. I'm out. I got daughters. I can't. I won't. He mounted his horse, looked at Jake. You coming? Jake stared at Ivy for a long moment, then at Virgil. Yeah, I'm coming. He backed toward his horse, never taking his eyes off Virgil. This is your fight now, not mine. They rode off together, leaving Virgil alone in the yard with a gun pointed at a 12-year-old girl who stood facing him with more courage than he'd ever possessed in his entire life. Rhett was moving before he'd made the conscious decision, stepping between Virgil and his daughter, his rifle aimed dead center at the man's chest. It's over. Your men are gone. You're alone. Drop the gun and ride out, or I'll drop you where you stand. You're bluffing. Try me. Rhett's voice was ice and iron. I've got nothing left to lose and everything to protect. You're the one who should be scared right now. Virgil looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth. This wasn't a man who would hesitate. This wasn't a man who would back down. This was a father protecting his children, a husband protecting his wife, and there was nothing more dangerous in the world than that. Slowly, Virgil lowered his gun. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You just don't want to admit it. I'll come back. With more men. With... No, you won't. Nita's voice came from behind them. She'd left the house, circled around in the chaos. Now she stood 10 feet away with Margaret's Winchester aimed at Virgil's back. Because if you ever set foot on this land again, if you ever threaten this family again, I'll kill you myself. And I won't hesitate. I won't regret it. I'll sleep just fine knowing I removed a monster from the world. The certainty in her voice was absolute. Virgil heard it, and something in him finally broke. He holstered his gun with shaking hands. Fine. You want her? Keep her. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway. He mounted his horse, his movements jerky with barely contained rage. As he turned to leave, he looked at Rhett one last time. You made an enemy today. I already had plenty. One more won't make a difference. Virgil rode off into the darkness, and the tension that had been holding everyone upright suddenly released. Rhett's knees nearly buckled. He turned to find Ivy rushing into his arms, Cole close behind, both children shaking with adrenaline and fear and relief all mixed together. Nita lowered the rifle, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Rhett reached for her with one arm, pulling her into their embrace, and suddenly they were all holding each other in the yard while the barn burned down behind them, crying and laughing and just breathing. Is it really over? Ivy whispered. Yeah, baby. It's over. Are you sure? Rhett looked at Nita over his daughter's head. I'm sure he won't come back. He can't afford to. He lost too much face, too many men. Whatever money he was promised, it's not worth the risk now. Nita nodded slowly, wanting to believe it. We should put out the fire. What we can of it. The barn was mostly gone, but they managed to keep the flames from spreading to the other buildings. They worked together through the night, hauling water, beating back embers, their clothes soaked with sweat and ash. By dawn, the barn was a smoking ruin, but the house stood untouched. The garden survived. The animals were safe in the far pasture. They'd lost a building, but saved everything that mattered. As the sun rose, painting the devastation in shades of pink and gold, they gathered on the porch, exhausted, filthy, but alive. Together. We need to rebuild, Rhett said, looking at the charred remains. It'll take time. Money we don't really have. We'll manage, Nita said. She was leaning against the porch railing, her face streaked with soot, her eyes red from smoke and tears. We've survived worse. Have we? Ivy asked, and there was something in her voice that made everyone turn to look at her. Because it feels like we've been just barely surviving for a long time, since Mama died. But last night we didn't just survive. We fought. We stood together. We chose each other. She looked at Nita. You could have run, could have let them take you and saved yourself the trouble. But you stayed. You fought for us. Of course I did. Nita's voice was rough with emotion. You're my family. And you're ours, Cole added quietly. The boy had barely spoken since the standoff, but now he stepped closer to Nita. I'm sorry I was mean when you first got here. I was scared. Scared that if I let myself like you, it would mean Mama didn't matter anymore. Your Mama will always matter, Nita said gently. I'm not trying to replace her. I couldn't if I wanted to, but maybe there's room for both. Room to remember her and still move forward. Cole nodded, then did something that surprised everyone. He hugged Nita, quick and fierce, before pulling back with red cheeks. I'm glad Pa married you. Me too, Ivy said, joining the hug. Rhett watched his children embrace the woman who'd come into their lives as a stranger, as property, as someone to be pitied or feared, and had somehow become their anchor, their hope, their future. And he felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 2 years, not just the absence of pain, but the presence of something good, something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth living for. Later, after the children had collapsed into exhausted sleep, Rhett and Nita sat on the porch together watching the sunrise. They hadn't spoken much, both too tired and too full of everything that had happened to find words. Finally, Nita said, You didn't have to do that. Stand up to them. Risk your life, your children's lives. For me. Yes, I did. Why? Rhett was quiet for a long moment, searching for the right words. When Margaret died, I thought my life was over. Not in the dramatic sense, but the part that mattered. The part that made getting up in the morning worth the effort. I went through the motions because the kids needed me to, but inside I was just hollow. He looked at her, this woman who'd survived horrors he couldn't imagine and still found the strength to be kind. Then you came. And I didn't want you here at first. Didn't want the complication, the responsibility, the reminder that the world kept turning even when I wanted it to stop. But you were here anyway. And little by little, you brought life back to this place. Not just the garden, everything. You made Ivy smile again, made Cole talk, Made me remember what it felt like to care about something besides grief. Rhett, let me finish. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle on hers. I told you before that I didn't know what I felt, that this started as just a practical arrangement. But that was a lie. Or maybe it was true at first and stopped being true somewhere along the way. I don't know when it changed. Maybe when I saw you in the garden, bringing life out of dead soil. Maybe when you sat with me that night and told me about your mother. Maybe when you stood in that window with a rifle, defending my children like they were yours. He paused, his throat tight. I'm not good at this. Margaret was the one who knew how to say things, how to feel things. But I'm trying. And what I'm trying to say is, I don't know if this is love. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. But I know I'd burn down the world before I'd let anyone hurt you. And if that's not love, it's close enough for me. Nita's eyes were streaming tears. I don't know how to do this either. Don't know how to trust it. Every time I've let myself hope, it's been taken away. Then we'll learn together. And if it gets taken away, we'll fight to get it back. That's what we do now. We fight. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Nita let herself feel safe. Not just protected, but safe. The kind of safety that comes from being seen, being valued, being chosen. I think I might love you, she whispered. I'm terrified to say it out loud because that makes it real, makes it something that can hurt me. But I think I do. Rhett pulled her closer, his own eyes burning. I think I might love you too. And you're right, it's terrifying, but maybe that's what makes it worth having. They sat there as the sun climbed higher, two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new, something stronger than what had been broken, something earned through fire and fear and the simple, profound act of choosing each other every day. The barn would need to be rebuilt. There would be more threats, more challenges, more reasons to give up. But for the first time in years, both of them believed they could face it. Not alone, but together. And that made all the difference. The work of rebuilding began the next morning, though none of them had slept more than a few hours. Rhett stood in front of the barn's remains, measuring the damage with tired eyes, calculating lumber and nails and man-hours they didn't have. The structure was gone, burned down to blackened beams and ash, but the foundation was solid stone. They could build on that. Start fresh. Nita joined him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She gave him one without speaking, and they stood side by side, steam rising from their cups in the cool morning air. It's not as bad as it looks, she said finally. It's pretty bad. We've come back from worse, Rhett smiled despite himself. When did you become the optimist? When I realized I had something worth being optimistic about. She sipped her coffee, her eyes on the ruins. We can rebuild this. Make it better than before. Stronger. With what money? The little I have saved won't cover half the materials we need. Then we get creative. There's timber in the hills. We can cut our own lumber. And I've been thinking, she hesitated, then pushed forward. The garden, the herbs. Some of them are valuable, medicinal. I could sell them in town, trade them. It won't be much at first, but it's something. Rhett turned to look at her. You do that? Use your knowledge, your work, for this? It's our ranch now, our family. Of course I would. She met his eyes steadily. Unless you don't want me involved in the finances. Some men don't like their wives. Stop. He set down his coffee and took her face in his hands. You're not some men's wives. You're mine. And that means we're partners in everything. The work, the decisions, the failures and successes. All of it. He kissed her forehead gently. Besides, you're probably better with money than I am. A smile flickered across her face. I've had to be. When you own nothing, you learn the value of everything. They stood there for a moment, foreheads touching, drawing strength from each other. Then Cole came running from the house, breathless and excited. Pa, there's people coming. Rhett's hand went instinctively to his gun, but Nita touched his arm. Wait, look. He followed her gaze to the road and saw not a threat, but something unexpected. A wagon, then another, then 3 riders on horseback, neighbors, people from town. As they got closer, Rhett recognized faces. Tom Henderson from the general store, the Michaels family who owned the ranch 5 miles east, Sarah Chen who ran the boarding house, Others he knew by sight, if not by name. They pulled up in the yard and Tom climbed down from the lead wagon, tipping his hat. "Heard you had some trouble out here. Thought you might could use some help." Rhett was speechless. He'd kept to himself since Margaret died, had pushed away offers of help, of community, of connection. He'd assumed they'd forgotten about him, or worse, that they didn't care. We appreciate it," he managed finally, "but I can't pay—" "Didn't ask you to," Tom interrupted. "You were sheriff for this county for 15 years, kept us safe, helped folks when they needed it. About time we returned the favor." He gestured to the wagons. "Brought lumber, nails, tools. Figure with enough hands we can get you a new barn up in a week or two." "And I brought food," Sarah Chen added, climbing down with a basket that smelled like fresh bread and stew. "Can't work on empty stomachs." Mrs. Michaels approached Nita with a shy smile. "You're the new Mrs. Calloway?" "I'm Eleanor. Heard about what happened with those men. Heard you stood up to them with a rifle." She held out her hand. "Welcome to the community. We take care of our own around here." Nita took the offered hand, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you. I'm not used to this." "Then get used to it," Eleanor said warmly. "You're one of us now." The day transformed into something Rhett hadn't experienced in years. Community. People working together, laughing, sharing stories while they cleared debris and measured new frame lines. The children ran wild, Cole and Ivy playing with the Michaels kids, their laughter echoing across the ranch like music. Rhett worked alongside the men, his muscles remembering the rhythm of construction, the satisfaction of building something with his hands. And he watched Nita with the women, tentative at first, then gradually relaxing as they drew her into conversation, asked about her herbs, shared their own remedies and recipes. At one point, Sarah Chen pulled Nita aside. "I know it can't be easy," she said quietly, "being new here, being different. But I want you to know, my family came from China 3 generations ago. We know what it's like to not quite fit, to have people look at you sideways, question whether you belong." She squeezed Nita's hand. "But you do belong. You're Rhett's wife. You're part of this community, and anyone who has a problem with that will have to answer to all of us." Nita's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just accept it. Let people help. Let yourself be part of something." Sarah smiled. "I hear you know about medicinal plants. I'd love to learn. My joints ache something terrible in the winter." "I could make you a salve," Nita said. "Willow bark, arnica, a few other things. It helps. Then we'll trade. I'll teach you to make my grandmother's dumplings. You teach me about herbs. Deal?" Nita found herself smiling, really smiling. "Deal." As the sun began to set, the men had cleared all the debris and laid out the foundation for the new barn. Tom Henderson stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead, and nodded with satisfaction. "That's good progress. We'll be back tomorrow. Get the frame up. You'll have a barn again before you know it." "I don't know how to thank you," Rhett said, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't have to? Just pass it on when someone else needs help." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "And Rhett? It's good to see you living again. Margaret would be happy." The words hit Rhett like a physical blow, but not a painful one. More like a release. "Yeah, she would." After everyone left, the 4 of them sat on the porch eating leftovers from the communal meal. The children were exhausted but happy, chattering about their day, about the friends they'd made, about how cool it was to see the new barn taking shape. "Mrs. Michaels said I could come visit sometime," Ivy said through a mouthful of bread. "She's got a daughter my age, Beth. She's nice." "That sounds good," Rhett said. "You should go." "Really? You'd let me?" "Why wouldn't I?" Ivy shrugged, suddenly shy. "We haven't really gone anywhere since Mama died. I thought maybe you wanted us to stay close. Stay home." Rhett felt a stab of guilt. He'd been so lost in his own grief he hadn't realized he'd been keeping his children prisoner to it. "That was wrong of me. You should see friends, have a life beyond this ranch." "I like it here," Cole said quickly. "I'm not complaining, just, it was nice, today, having people around." "It was," Nita agreed softly. "I'd forgotten what that felt like, being part of something bigger than just survival." Rhett reached over and took her hand. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're living. all of us. That night, after the children were asleep, Rhett and Nita lay together in the bedroom that had once been his and Margaret's. They'd moved Nita's few belongings from the shed the day after the wedding, but she'd been sleeping on the floor, insisting Rhett take the bed. Tonight, exhausted from the day's work and the emotional weight of everything that had happened, they'd both collapsed onto the mattress fully clothed. Nita turned to face him in the darkness. "I need to tell you something." "All right. When I was younger, before everything, I was supposed to marry. There was a boy in my village. Good, kind. We'd known each other since we were children." Her voice was steady but sad. "When the traitors came, they killed him. He tried to protect me. They shot him in front of me and then dragged me away while I screamed." Rhett's chest tightened. "Nita, let me finish. I need to say this." She took a breath. "For years, I thought I'd never feel anything for anyone again. I didn't want to. Feeling meant hurting, and I'd hurt enough. I told myself I was dead inside, that the part of me that could love had died with him." She touched Rhett's face gently. "But then you happened, you and Ivy and Cole, and I started feeling again, started hoping, and it terrified me because I knew what losing feels like." She paused. "But today, watching those people come to help us, watching this community accept me, watching you work alongside neighbors who care about you, I realized something. Love isn't just about the person, it's about the life you build together, the family, the home, the future." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm all in. No more holding back, no more being ready to run. This is my home. You're my husband. They're my children, and I'm going to fight for this family every single day for the rest of my life." Rhett pulled her close, his heart so full it ached. "I love you. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered, "and I'm not afraid to say it anymore." They held each other in the darkness, two broken people who'd found wholeness in the most unlikely way, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, they slept peacefully. No nightmares, no fear, just rest. The barn rose slowly over the next 2 weeks. Every day brought neighbors with tools and willing hands. The frame went up, solid and strong. Then the walls, the roof, the doors. It wasn't fancy, but it was well built and it was theirs. A symbol of resilience, of community, of starting over. On the day they finished, Tom Henderson stood back and admired the work. "That'll stand for 50 years if you treat it right." "We will," Rhett promised. "Thank you, all of you." "Our pleasure. Now you owe us a barn-raising dance." Tom grinned. "It's tradition. New barn means celebration. Saturday night, bring everyone. We'll have music, food, dancing." Rhett glanced at Nita, who looked both excited and nervous. "We'll be there." Saturday came too quickly. Ivy spent hours fussing over what to wear, finally settling on a simple blue dress that had been Margaret's. She'd grown into it, and when she came downstairs, Rhett's breath caught. She looked so much like her mother it hurt. "Too much?" Ivy asked, seeing his expression. "No, you look beautiful. Your mama would be proud." Ivy smiled, then turned to Nita. "You should wear the green one, the one we found in the trunk." Nita hesitated. The green dress had also been Margaret's, saved for special occasions. It felt strange wearing it, like stepping into someone else's life. "She'd want you to," Ivy said softly. "She wouldn't want it sitting in a trunk forever. And you're family now." "Really family?" Nita nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When she emerged wearing the green dress, altered to fit her slightly taller frame, Rhett stared. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Nothing. You look happy, that's all." "I am happy." She took his hand. "Ready?" The celebration was held at the Michaels Ranch, their barn transformed with lanterns and ribbons. Music filled the air, a fiddle and guitar playing old frontier songs that made people's feet tap involuntarily. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Children ran wild, playing games in the twilight. Nita stood at the edge of it all, overwhelmed. She'd never been to anything like this, never been welcomed into a community, never been treated as an equal. Sarah Chin found her and pulled her toward a group of women who were laughing and sharing stories. "Nita, come meet everyone properly. This is Mary Hannah Josephine. Ladies, this is Nita Calloway." The women greeted her warmly, asking questions, sharing gossip, drawing her into their circle like she'd always been there. And slowly, Nita felt the last of her walls crumbling. These people didn't see her as property or a burden or someone to be pitied. They saw her as a person, as Rhett's wife, as one of them. Meanwhile, Rhett stood with a group of men, nursing a beer and watching his children play. Cole was racing around with other boys his age, his laughter loud and genuine. Ivy was talking with Beth Michaels and two other girls, animated and bright. "They look good," Tom observed. "Happy." "They are. Finally." Rhett took a drink. "I didn't think we'd get here. After Margaret, I thought that was it, that we'd just exist in that pain forever. But you didn't." "No, we didn't." Rhett's eyes found Nita across the barn, watching her laugh at something Sarah had said. "She saved us."
"I don't think she knows it, but she did." "Then you better make sure she knows," Tom said. "Life's too short for unsaid things." The music shifted to a slower song, couples pairing off to dance. Rhett crossed the barn to where Nita stood, bowed slightly, and offered his hand. "May I?" She looked uncertain. "I don't know how to dance, not like this." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." She took his hand and he led her onto the floor. They moved awkwardly at first, stepping on each other's feet, laughing at their own clumsiness. But gradually they found a rhythm, swaying together, and the rest of the world faded away. "I meant what I said," Rhett murmured. "You saved us. Me, the kids. You brought us back to life. You saved me too. Gave me a home, a family, a future I never thought I'd have. Then we saved each other." "Yeah," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We did." As they danced, neither noticed Ivy and Cole watching from the side with matching smiles. Neither saw the way the community observed them with approval and warmth. They were lost in each other, in the miracle of finding love in the wreckage, of building something beautiful from broken pieces. The months that followed were the hardest and best of Rhett's life. The ranch required constant work. Fences needed mending, animals needed tending, crops needed planting. But now he had help. Nita worked beside him every day, her strength and determination matching his own. The children took on more responsibilities, growing into their roles with pride. The herb garden expanded, becoming more than just Margaret's memory. It became Nita's legacy. She cultivated rare plants, created medicines and teas that people traveled miles to buy. Word spread of the Cheyenne woman who could cure ailments doctors couldn't, who knew the old ways of healing. People came with respect, with payment, with gratitude. The money helped. They rebuilt the ranch, adding a workshop where Nita could dry and prepare her medicines. They bought new livestock. They hired occasional help during busy seasons. But more than the financial stability, it was the respect that mattered. Nita was no longer just Rhett's wife. She was Nita Calloway, healer, businesswoman, valued member of the community. One evening, 6 months after the barn raising, Rhett found her in the garden at sunset. She was kneeling in the dirt, her hands gentle on a new rosemary plant, whispering something in her native language. "What are you saying?" he asked, sitting beside her. "A blessing. A prayer of thanks." She sat back on her heels. "My mother used to do this. Thank the earth for providing. Ask the plants to grow strong. I thought I'd forgotten it, but being here, working this soil, it's coming back. The good memories. The things I thought I'd lost. I'm glad." Rhett picked up a handful of soil, let it sift through his fingers. "Margaret loved this garden, spent hours out here. After she died, I couldn't stand to look at it. It hurt too much. But you brought it back, made it something new while still honoring what it was. That's what we're all doing, isn't it? Making something new while honoring what came before." "Yeah, I guess it is." He looked at her, this woman who'd come to him as property and become his partner, his love, his future. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it." "All right." "When Margaret died, I thought love died with her. I thought that was it, that I'd had my chance and lost it. But you showed me that's not how it works. Love doesn't run out. It doesn't replace. It just grows. Different, but no less real." He took her hand. "I love you, Nita. Not as a replacement for what I lost, not as second best,
I love you as my wife, my partner, the woman I choose every single day. And I need you to know that. Tears streamed down her face. I know. And I love you the same way, not as someone else's husband, as mine, as Rhett Calloway, the man who saw me as human when everyone else saw property, the man who fought for me, who built a life with me. They kissed as the sun set, surrounded by growing things, by life they'd coaxed from barren soil. And in that moment, they weren't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. They were just present, just grateful, just alive. Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled high and winds that howled through the canyon. They huddled together in the house, keeping the fires burning, telling stories, playing games. Ivy taught Nita to read and write English. Nita taught the children about stars, about tracking animals, about survival skills that had kept her alive through impossible odds. Cole, now 11, had grown serious about ranching. He followed his father everywhere, learning every task, taking pride in his increasing competence. One evening, as they brought in firewood together, he said, "Pa, I'm glad you married Nita." Rhett smiled. "Me too, son." "Do you think Mama would be mad?" "No, your Mama wanted us to be happy, to live full lives. She wouldn't want us frozen in grief forever." Nita says grief is like a scar. It doesn't go away, but it stops hurting so much, and eventually you can touch it without flinching. She's a smart woman. Yeah. Cole was quiet for a moment. "I think I'm ready to talk about Mama now, to remember the good things without it making me sad." "Then we'll do that. We'll share stories, keep her memory alive the right way." That night, for the first time since Margaret's death, they talked about her openly, shared funny memories, sad ones, ordinary ones. Ivy told stories Nita had never heard. Cole shared things he'd been holding inside for years. And Nita listened, asking questions, laughing and crying with them, honoring this woman she'd never met, but who'd shaped the family she now belonged to. "Thank you," Rhett said later when the children were asleep, "for letting them talk about her, for not being threatened by her memory." "Why would I be threatened? She was part of you, part of them. Pretending she didn't exist wouldn't make me more important. It would just make everyone sad." Nita curled against him. "Besides, I like learning about her. She sounds like she was an amazing person." "She was. And she would have loved you." "You think so?" "I know so. You're exactly the kind of person she admired. Strong, brave, no patience for bullshit." Nita laughed. "High praise. The highest." Spring arrived with a violence of color. The desert bloomed, painting the landscape in reds and yellows and purples. The garden exploded with new growth. And Nita realized she was pregnant. She told Rhett one morning in the garden, her hands shaking as she placed his palm on her still flat stomach. "There's a baby. Our baby." Rhett's world tilted. A baby. New life, new hope, new fear all tangled together. He thought of Margaret, of how pregnancy had made her glow, of how excited she'd been for each child. And he felt that familiar twist of grief and guilt. But then he looked at Nita's face, saw her fear that he'd reject this, that he'd see it as a betrayal, and he knew what he had to do. "That's wonderful," he said, pulling her close. "Scary and wonderful and perfect." "You're not upset?" "Upset? No. Terrified? Yes, but in a good way. In a, I get another chance to do this right kind of way." Ivy and Cole were thrilled when they found out. Ivy immediately started planning, talking about names and baby clothes and how she'd help. Cole was quieter but equally pleased, already constructing a cradle in the workshop with careful, deliberate hands. The pregnancy was hard. Nita was sick constantly in the beginning, exhausted all the time. But she pushed through, still working the garden, still making her medicines, still being a mother to Ivy and Cole, even as her body changed and grew. Rhett watched her with awe and love, this woman who never quit, who kept going no matter how hard things got. He made her rest when he could, took on more of her work, made sure she ate even when she didn't want to. "I can do it myself," she protested one afternoon when he brought her lunch in the garden. "I know you can, but you don't have to. Let me take care of you. You've been taking care of everyone else." She softened, accepting the food. "It's strange, being cared for. I'm not used to it." "Get used to it. You're stuck with me now."
Promise? Promise. The baby came in late autumn, just as the first frost touched the garden. The labor was long and brutal, testing Nita's strength in ways nothing else had. Sarah Chen and Eleanor Michaels attended, their experienced hands guiding the process, their calm voices keeping Nita focused. Rhett paced outside, useless and terrified, remembering Margaret's last pregnancy, how difficult it had been. Ivy and Cole sat with them, all three of them united in fear and hope. Finally, after hours that felt like days, they heard it. A baby's cry, strong and loud and alive. Sarah emerged, smiling broadly. "You have a daughter, and Nita's fine, tired but fine." Rhett rushed inside to find Nita propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. "Meet your daughter," Nita said, her voice hoarse but proud. Rhett took the baby carefully, this tiny, perfect person who was part of him and part of Nita and completely her own miracle. "Hi there, little one. I'm your pa." The baby opened her eyes, dark and alert, and seemed to look right at him, and Rhett felt his heart crack open in the best possible way. "What should we name her?" Nita asked. Rhett thought for a moment. "Hope, because that's what she is, what you all are. Hope for the future." "Hope Calloway," Nita tested the name. "I like it." Ivy and Cole came in, tentative and awed, meeting their new sister with gentle hands and wide eyes. And as Rhett watched his family gather around this new life, he felt something shift inside him. The grief that had defined him for so long didn't disappear. But it settled, became part of his foundation rather than his entire structure. Margaret would always be his first love, the mother of his first children, an irreplaceable part of his story. But Nita was his present and his future, the woman he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back, the mother of his third child and stepmother to his first two, his partner in building a life that honored the past while embracing what came next. 2 years later, the ranch was thriving. The garden had become famous throughout the territory. People came from 3 counties away for Nita's medicines. The barn held healthy livestock, the fields produced strong crops, and the house rang with laughter and life. Hope was a wild, fearless toddler who followed Cole everywhere and adored her big sister. Ivy was 14 now, beautiful and strong, already helping run the business side of the herb trade. Cole was 13, practically a man, working the ranch with skill and pride. And Rhett and Nita had found a rhythm, a partnership that was both practical and profound. They worked together, laughed together, fought occasionally, and made up quickly, raised their children with love and discipline in equal measure. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rhett said, "You remember when you first got here? How scared you were? How I didn't want you here?" "I remember. Feels like a lifetime ago." It was. We were different people then, broken people. And now? Rhett looked at his wife, at the garden she'd built, at the children playing in the yard, at the life they'd created from nothing. Now we're still broken, but we're broken together. And somehow, that makes us whole. Nita smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I used to think survival was enough, that just making it through each day was victory. But you taught me different. You taught me that living is better than surviving, that love is worth the risk. That home isn't a place, it's people who choose you and keep choosing you. You taught me that too." Then we taught each other. As the stars began to appear one by one, Rhett thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pain and loss and fear, the courage and hope and love. The way broken things could be mended if you had patience and faith and someone willing to stand beside you through the hard work of healing. The barren land had bloomed, not through magic or miracles, but through sweat and tears and the simple, profound act of refusing to give up, through choosing life over merely existing, through opening hearts that had been closed and building family from strangers. Virgil Cade never came back. The threat he'd represented faded into memory. Another storm weathered and survived. The community had closed ranks around them, making it clear that anyone who threatened the Calloways would answer to all of them. And slowly, Nita had transformed from the scared woman who'd been dumped in their yard like garbage into a pillar of that community, respected and valued and loved. Hope toddled over, demanding to be picked up. Rhett scooped her into his lap
and she settled there happily, playing with his watch chain. Ivy joined them on the porch, fresh from helping Cole put away the horses. And for a moment, they were all together, this family built from loss and choice and love. "Pa," Ivy said, "remember when you said we were just surviving?" "Yeah. We're not anymore. We're living, really living." "We are," Rhett agreed, looking at each of them in turn. His children, his wife, his life. "We really are." And as the last light faded from the sky and the desert cooled around them, Rhett Calloway understood something fundamental. That the barren land hadn't just been the ranch or the garden. It had been his heart, Nita's heart, all of their hearts, made barren by loss and fear and pain. But barren land, given water and care and time, could bloom again. Could produce life more beautiful for having survived the drought. Could become not just habitable, but abundant. They'd started as strangers, brought together by cruelty and debt and the worst impulses of desperate men. But they'd become family through choice, through courage, through the daily decision to show up for each other even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The garden Nita had rebuilt wasn't just herbs and vegetables. It was a metaphor for everything they'd become. Life coaxed from dead soil, beauty grown from pain, hope cultivated from despair. And as Rhett held his youngest daughter and sat surrounded by his family on the porch of the home they'd built together, he knew with absolute certainty that every hard moment had been worth it. Every fear faced, every fight fought, every tear shed had led them here, to this moment, to this peace, to this love. The barren land had bloomed at last, and it was more beautiful than any of them had dared to imagine.